And now I would like to introduce Mike Brady, who will introduce today's speaker.
Hi, everybody. So I became involved in restorative justice almost 15 years ago because it was an intersection of both personal and community responsibility. And my preconceived notions that it was soft on crime or it was easy was quickly dispelled. LCJP, Longmont Community Justice Partnership, has been a leader in the state and nation for 25 years, and its executive director is here today, Kathleen McGoey. She's led the organization to new and bigger successes each year, utilizing her bachelor's and master's together with years of on-the-ground facilitating difficult and high-risk cases amongst offenders, victims, and members of the community. She's the author of 2 books and a frequent lecturer across the nation and other countries. Please welcome Kathleen McGoey.
Thank you so much, Mike. I would love to bring you everywhere I go with that intro. That was so gracious. Thank you. And thank you to the entire Boulder Rotary. I really appreciate the spirit of engagement and connection that you've brought to this online platform. I actually haven't experienced such a lively start to such a large group meeting. So congratulations, and that is very restorative. So I'm so happy to be connected with you all today. As Mike said, I am the executive director of Longmont Community Justice Partnership, which is a nonprofit implementing restorative justice right here in Longmont, not far from you all. And I would really like to try to invite you into, to the best of my ability, a kind of embodied experience of what it's like to experience restorative justice. One of my board members has said recently, something that we're really missing out on in this era of the coronavirus is the embodied experience of being together. So I am going to invite you to pause and take a breath, clear your mind. And as I tell you this story, I'm going to invite you to imagine stepping into the role of a number of different characters who form the story of a specific restorative justice case that came to Longmont Community Justice Partnership, LCJP. So to begin, imagine, if you can, do your best, that you are a 16-year-old boy named Max. You are a hunter. You have a lot of experience with your family of going hunting. You have family land out kind of west of Longmont where you can go hunting any day after school. You're familiar with safety precautions. You do this with your friends. It's kind of like your peaceful place, your recreation, your fun is being out on the land, connecting with the moment, and hunting usually goose or geese, ducks, that kind of thing. Now imagine you're Max, you're 16, it's a Wednesday morning of the times when you go to school in person, and you wake up late. You have an English test first period, so now you are rushed because you've got to get to English on time. Imagine you're Max and you are just going to make it on time. It's only after you park your car in the school parking lot that you see it. Your hunting rifle is sitting on the back seat of your car. This is something you've never done before. The clock's ticking and you have a choice. You think about your parents and your slipping grades and how they've, placed this expectation on you because you're a junior and it's time to look at colleges. You choose English class and you walk away from your car. Imagine now, shifting, you are the school resource officer. So you're the police officer at the high school where Max attends. You're notified that a video has just turned up on Snapchat, like all things do. The video shows a car in the parking lot of your school that has a rifle that kind of looks like something's on top of it, like almost like it's covered up, but not really. And the video pans from the rifle in the car slowly to the front door of the school and then stops. You, as the school resource officer, know that the clock just started ticking and every moment counts. You have to follow tactical police protocol. You have to follow school district protocol. You have to be communicating with all of the other leaders at the school. Your brain is racing to think about what details you can piece together to imagine whose car this is, and any other information that you've gotten in the last few days or weeks that would suggest that someone was a threat against the school. And mostly what you're thinking of is, could this be the worst day? The day that you have to choose to use lethal force to stop a student from causing irreparable harm. Imagine you're the school principal. You can't believe this is happening here. You're responsible for the safety of over 400 students. The students, their families, your staff, your leadership, everyone is looking to you to handle this right. Imagine you are the school resource officer once again. Because you have relationships with your students, you've been able to piece together enough information that you're reasonably sure that the rifle belongs to this student, Max. You speak to Max immediately and confirm he has not had intent to use the gun at school, that it was a mistake. Max is super nervous because he's super scared of what his parents are gonna say because they trusted him with the gun. So it's hard to get Max to talk to you about what's really going on. But ultimately, you see that Max is willing to take responsibility for bringing the gun onto the school grounds, which would equate to a felony level offense in the criminal legal system. You have a choice. Because you are a school resource officer who's not restricted by policies like zero tolerance, you speak with the principal, and with some effort, you get his agreement to refer the case to restorative justice. In this case, you had to get the principal's agreement because he is sort of the representative of the victim or the harm party. And you also had to make sure that Max was going to be willing to take responsibility for his choices and the fact that he did cause harm through those choices. Because you're in Longmont, making that referral to restorative justice means that you don't have to write a ticket. You don't have to make an arrest. You don't have to send Max to court. You're just able to write up the equivalent of a ticket in a referral form and send it directly to the staff at LCJP. So imagine now, again, you are Max. In preparation for restorative justice, you have an intake call with an LCJP staff member, and then you and your parents meet with two facilitators. One of them is a really nice lady named Kathleen. Your parents have consulted with a lawyer before meeting with Kathleen, and they keep telling you, make sure you say everything the way we've told you to, because you really messed up, and you might get in extra trouble if you say the wrong thing. This makes you super confused because Kathleen tells you that the best thing to do is to be completely honest. You're still Max. It comes to the big day, the restorative justice circle, which is called a conference. You are nervous. You and your parents sit in a circle with the two facilitators. The principal, the SRO, the school resource officer, and 2 volunteers who you hear are there to represent the community. The facilitator asks each person to talk about how they were impacted by your choices, and you think, this is when I am gonna hear it. These people are gonna tell me that I am the worst thing around, and figure out all the ways that they would like to punish me, because that's what happens when you get in trouble. As Max, you are surprised. Everyone that you hear from, including the principal, including the school resource officer, is surprisingly kind. After all the pressure that you heard from your parents, you discover that actually each of these people is treating you like you have this adult ability to take ownership for your actions. And they're speaking directly to you with this sort of respect that's not like what you're used to when you get in trouble. One community volunteer says that they're a parent of a student at your school, and they describe what it was like, or what it could be like, to have gotten a call from the principal when they learn that there's violence at the school. Another community volunteer describes how he personally is just really nervous about guns, that guns make him really uncomfortable, and knowing that they're out there in the community is really hard for him. And he reiterates how important it is to him that people like Max, who have a different level of comfort, are really extra careful with safety precautions and following the law and making sure they understand how to be extra responsible with that huge privilege that they have. You also hear, of course, from the principal and the school resource officer, and you had no idea. You had no idea how much stress and trouble that you caused when you thought you were doing the right thing because you were just going to English. You also had no idea how personally they take their jobs, how serious it is to them, and how crazy it is that those people are supposed to keep over 400 people safe every day. After hearing from all of those people about how they were affected, including your parents, but you've already heard a lot from them, the group gets to hear from the facilitator about who you are, like, who are you outside of this incident? And they share back about your love of the outdoors, how you love to invent things with your brother, how you have a great time after school with your friends, just kind of romping around outside, whether you're hunting or not, and some of your hopes and dreams for the future. So now is the big decision. What will they make you do? They've told you that you have to repair the harms. You have to make things right with the people that you've impacted. But what can you possibly do? It turns out from the principal, he just really wants you to give back to the community. So you commit to doing 60 hours of community service through the Colorado Parks and Wildlife, because the principal says this is a meaningful way for you to give back to the community. From the school resource officer, you learn that she has a lot of trouble managing everything that comes up on social media. And she's wondering if you could use your strengths with Snapchat to help her create some posts on Snapchat about school safety, and that you can do that anonymously. It doesn't have to come through you. You just need to help her create something that's kind of cool that students will actually look at and learn from. You agree to do that. And third, one of the community members who is an engineer and heard that you are also considering maybe one day you want to be an engineer, suggests that you make a decision tree where you map out all the different decisions that you made that day and kind of look at, where could I have made a different choice? What would have happened if I followed this choice versus that choice? And she helps you understand that not only does that help you learn from the choices that you made, but it also helps kind of cultivate some of the skills that you might need to use one day as an engineer. So you walk away from that conference, that circle, with a contract. 3 specific actions that you're going to take according to what you heard from the people in the group to make things right. You complete all of those items, and in the process of completing those, surprisingly, things get a lot better with your parents because they see you follow through, and some of their trust starts to be restored in you. You also get to know the principal a little bit better and the school resource officer, so you feel more connected to your school community, which you didn't even think you really needed, but it feels really good. Upon completion of all your contract items, you go back to meet with the LCJP staff to show them everything that you've done, and they tell you, congratulations, your case is closed. There's no charge on your record. There's no more actions that you need to take. There's no more meetings to cover extra variables with an attorney. It's in the past. It actually never even needs to come up again, other than the pieces that you learned about where you need to make different choices moving forward. Thank you for following me in that participatory story of restorative justice. I'm going to depart from our visualization and tell you a little bit more about the way that our program works, and then I'll pause to see what questions you have about that or anything else that I share now. So restorative justice in Longmont has been around for 25 years. We were founded in 1994 in large part because of the vision of our public safety chief, Mike Butler, who I'm sure many of you have met, along with our founder, Dr. Beverly Title. And initially, we were only working with youth who were charged or facing charges for the first time for low-level offenses. Because of the success of the program, we now work with youth and adults, which is a really unique model in the country. Turns out that adults need second chances too and can also learn and change behavior. I'm sure we can all relate. And we can now work with any individual, even if they have a criminal record, as long as they're meeting, the case meets those criteria of the person who caused harm is taking responsibility and the person who was harmed is willing for the case to come this alternative route. All of the cases that we work with at this time come directly from the Longmont Police Department, and they're pre-file, meaning there's been no charges filed against somebody. However, for example, in the case of Max, if he had not completed his contract items or he had reoffended during the contract, then we would be turning the case back to the conventional system and it would go through the traditional criminal legal route. We can work with misdemeanor and felony level charges. The majority are more lower level crimes like theft, vandalism, trespassing, but we do every year take things like assault and harassment and some higher level persons crimes. We work with around 100 cases per year. And the way that we do that is actually through the amazing contribution of some very talented volunteers, including Marcia Sprague and Jean Bedell, who are on this call. I'm guessing there might be some more volunteers here that I just can't see, but I've seen Jean and Marcia, so super grateful to these folks because this is more than your average volunteer commitment, as you can imagine. They show up with a huge amount of heart and compassion and willingness to often step outside their own comfort zones to be in this realm of restorative justice, which actually requires a paradigm shift out of a punitive mindset. Let's see, our cases have around 90 to 95% success rate of completion. So that's one measure of success, and then equally as important, victims and harm parties who participate in our process report feeling that the offender was held accountable to their actions and that they feel satisfied by restorative justice 100% of the time. And that is really essential to the practice of restorative justice. We want to always give harmed individuals, including community members, a voice in getting their needs met and the creation of justice. We also have worked in the past in schools in St. Vrain Valley, and currently we've shifted the way that we work in schools by providing training instead of giving direct service. So that means that we go into schools and train any staff, administrative, teachers, counselors on how to use restorative tools. I imagine many of you are connected in some way to Boulder Valley School District, and I've done some orientation trainings there, and I know there's some interest, especially when looking at bullying prevention. How can restorative practices be used in that way locally in Boulder Valley? And as Mike mentioned, one of the greatest sort of opportunities that has come to me in my work at LCJP is because we have this really unique partnership model with police. We are often invited to train and consult and present throughout the country. Most restorative justice, the way it's implemented now, is through a model that you may know about at the Boulder County District Attorney's Office. So starting with Stan Garnett and now with Michael Doherty, they have an in-house restorative justice program, which is also phenomenal, because that means if there's a youth who gets arrested in Longmont and doesn't get screened for restorative justice at that moment for a number of reasons, they will actually have the opportunity of being screened again for the DA's restorative justice program once they get there. So that's it. Colorado is, as Mike said, also leading the country in our implementation of restorative justice statewide. And so LCJP has a specific asset and resource that we would like to provide to other communities, so that especially during this time of looking at how can we relate to police in communities differently, this is one way of supporting police by giving them an additional tool to do their job. And in fact, that is what most police officers in Longmont report, feeling that this is why they support restorative justice, because they know that there's something that needs to happen for many cases that's not necessarily punishment and not doing nothing. So this gives them another route, given the right pieces are in place, to support a process that is really about repairing relationship and supporting learning and accountability. So I will pause for the moment and see what kind of questions have come up. I really appreciate all your attention.
Thank you, Kathleen. So our first question is with Bill Rubin, but he's having some microphone issues. So I'm going to read his question, okay? Is there resistance to the concept of restorative justice in the community? And if so, how do you address community education and advocacy in support of the program?
Thanks for that question. That is an ongoing effort. I have the benefit of only having worked at LCJP for 7 years, and we were around for almost 20 years before that. So there is some skepticism that comes up from community members. And so what we try to do is ongoing community awareness, community education through any means possible. One of the things that we have on our side is that the City of Longmont, City Council, Public Safety are all in support of this work. And then, so that's kind of, thinking about like support from leadership. And then amazingly, at this point, we don't even really need to publicize or recruit for new volunteers. Our volunteers continue to show up through word of mouth. Actually, after the last election, when President Trump was elected, we had a huge influx of new volunteers, people who wanted to figure out a way to make a meaningful difference in the community. And I think as criminal justice reform becomes more and more of a topic that people are talking about, that starts raising that curiosity and question for people about what difference can I make? And so restorative justice sort of invites in people from all different backgrounds, all different experiences, and tells them how they can participate. And so that helps us, I think, having the involvement of many people. Also, at this point, there are so many families who have participated in this program. Like, I just met during our stay-at-home orders an across-the-street neighbor here in Longmont for the first time. And of course, he's like, oh yeah, restorative justice, I did that with my kid. So that really helps, that just the positive experiences that people are having that they talk about, I think at this point in time has helped us to overcome that resistance.
Great. Thank you, Kathleen. Meryl, you've got a question.
Sure. Thank you, Mike. And thanks for speaking to the club, Kathy. I'm a big supporter of restorative justices, both as efficacy and compassion. My question concerns diversity. How does the Longmont Restorative Justice Program address the challenges posed by differential treatment in the community of diverse offenders? Could you address not only people of color, but also those on the autism spectrum?
Thank you so much for that question. I want to start with that piece about individuals who maybe on the autism spectrum or have a mental health challenge or something that an officer responds to because they can't necessarily detect the sort of intrinsically what's causing somebody to act a certain way. They can't see it visibly. Years ago, I facilitated a case that involved two young men who are both, they're on the autism spectrum, but they're verbal, and they were out and about trying to open car doors. They weren't actually stealing anything. They were just kind of like trying to see what cars' doors were unlocked. And when the officer contacted them, she was really confused about the way that they communicated with her. But she chose to refer them to restorative justice. And in that conference, the parents actually brought to the attention of that officer that they were concerned generally about the lack of training for officers to understand what individuals on the autism spectrum might, like how they might be communicating, what to look for. And what, I'm bringing up this story because I think it's really meaningful to me that what happens in restorative justice becomes like a de-escalated space for people to talk about their own personal experience and identify their needs in a way that's not full of blame and confrontation, which of course is a big concern right now about how we address things like racial justice in our communities. We aren't demonstrating generally a lot of skillfulness in how we have those conversations, and it seems really divisive. So we are on the end, as LCJP, we have responsibility for looking at our numbers, looking at who's being sent our way, whether they are from diverse racial groups, what are our numbers of, participants who are white versus non-white. Right now, our numbers are 70% of our referrals are white, and then about 25% are Latinx, Hispanic, and 5% others, so Black, Asian, and others. And what's interesting about that is that that matches the demographics, the racial demographics of our community. But there's a missing piece of data that we're exploring that now, frankly, because of what's happening across the country, the city has become more interested in really looking closely at, okay, those are LCJP's referrals, but out of all the youth that are being contacted, what number of those youth are getting restorative justice versus not, and what's the racial breakdown there? So we're looking forward to being able to see that. Right now, we don't have access to that kind of data. And one of the things that we do with our training with officers is ongoing. We are constantly in front of officers, and what we try to do is make sure that we tell them specific success stories about specific individuals so that they're hearing from us the person who can be successful in restorative justice doesn't look a certain way, that there are many different people with different capacities, with different appearances, different backgrounds who can be successful. So yeah, we take responsibility for that. I think we can always be doing better, but it is something that we prioritize in as many means possible that we have.
Great, thank you. Stu, you've got a question.
Hi, actually it's Norma Portnoy, but thank you so much. So when my son attended New Vista High School, I believe he was a volunteer with the restorative justice program there. I was curious to know if it's still going on there or if it's only available through the DA's office, or just what happens in the city of Boulder.
Ooh, good question. I think that the New Vista program is still around. I'm not 100% sure, and I don't know, you know, like any school initiative, sometimes things kind of ebb and flow. So I can't know with any certainty of what the current status is at New Vista. I hope that it's still going really strong, and I really support that model of having student team members, like it sounds like maybe your son was a part of, because then the restorative culture is integrated into the student's way of being, and that's a life skill. So restorative practices and restorative justice become something that aren't just about discipline. It's a way of being in respectful relationship, taking responsibility with each other. And wouldn't it be beautiful if those values were sort of fundamental to all of us from a young age? They pick it up so much faster. In the city of Boulder, there is the DA's program, and then the sheriff's office also has a restorative justice program. So if you are contacted by someone from the sheriff's department, you couldn't get referred to that program. And then the City of Boulder Mediation program also has offered restorative justice processes on a as needed basis.
Great, thank you. Bill Anderson, you got a question.
Yes, thank you so much for coming to talk to us today. This is a fascinating topic. The question I had surrounds recidivism and whether there's any data tracking recidivism in the traditional justice system approach relative to the restorative justice approach. And I wondered if you could kind of talk about that a little and comment on it.
Yeah, thanks. That's usually one of the numbers that I mention, and I lost that one, so thank you for asking. So recidivism is so tricky. There isn't one specific definition of recidivism at a local or national level. Some of the things that we know generally are when after a youth has their first involvement with the criminal justice system, meaning that they are charged, they get ticketed or arrested, the likelihood that they will have an additional charge increases by 80%. So the first time, and we know, you know, psychologically, when you think about that for so many youth, and this is like nationwide, this isn't necessarily Boulder County or Longmont, so many of those youth, they're like kind of like, they're trying to find their place, and they're getting in trouble in a lot of different places, and they get that label of, now you've got this charge on your record. It opens up a certain path because you're already there, you're already going in that direction. Generally with adults, there's a number that's around 60 to 70% recidivism, meaning in some cases, you know, for adults, you've been arrested once, it's 60 to 70% likely that you will be arrested again. In Longmont, with our data, we have done a study now through, thanks to CU Boulder Economics Department. They looked at 2,400 offenders that we worked with between 2006 and 2017, and found that for reoffense within the city of Longmont, so we weren't able to look outside of Longmont, but within Longmont, there was only a 3.5% recidivism or reoffense rate. So this is honestly the lowest, it's the lowest recidivism number that I have heard And I want to acknowledge that it's limited to the city of Longmont. So we don't, if I, went through restorative justice here in Longmont and then went and robbed a bank in Boulder, it wouldn't show up on the Longmont City database. So there's a missing piece there. But we do feel encouraged that at least within the city, looking at an 11, or actually it was 2006 to 2018, so it's 12 years, that is a really low rate. The state of Colorado has assessed recidivism for youth going through restorative justice in diversion programs like the program at the DA's office, and they find that for those youth it's about an 8% recidivism rate. So those, generally people are saying under 10% is what we're finding with restorative justice interventions, but it's really hard to have a number to sort of compare that to within the criminal justice system.
Thank you. That's unbelievable.
Yeah.
And before we go on to the next question, Kathleen, I was wondering if you could expand just a little bit on maybe some of the economics. What does this really mean, versus someone going through the, the justice system and then into prison or to a camp or whatever? Just could you talk about that?
Mike's good at asking these questions, these money questions. It's an important data point. Thank you for raising that. So LCJP serves around 200 offenders per year with an overall budget of, right now it's at about $500,000. To incarcerate one youth for 1 year in the state of Colorado costs us $100,000. And that's just like the incarceration. That's not including then, there's going to be additional services, there's going to be probation, parole, all these different things that also cost taxpayers money. So we know that this investment up front, which our budget can stay relatively low in terms of related to the amount that we actually invest in every single person that we work with because of our amazing volunteers. So that's one way, we don't have to have a staff of 50 because we have at any given time around 50 active volunteers. So what we look at is really saying, the money that we can invest in understanding, for example, a strengths-based approach, right? Like I was talking about how with Max, we talked about who he was outside of this particular incident, using those strengths to repair harm and sort of invite him to consider his choices differently based on who he is, not as kind of this bad kid doing bad things. But that strengths-based approach helps support the investment that we're making because we're inviting people to see themselves as valuable contributing members of the community.
So next we have Gary Kahn with a question. Gary, you're gonna have to unmute yourself.
Yep, I do. Thank you. Kathleen, thank you so much for bringing this story to us. We've heard from Mike for a number of years about the success that you guys have had, and really nice to see and hear you talk about it directly. Just want to make one observation that this seems like our four-way test is a recipe for what you guys do. Mm-hmm. And it's just struck me as interesting. But my question has to do with, it seems like you've had some success in being recognized nationally for being a leader in this area. I'd like to know, how that's been manifested. In other words, what kind of awards or who's acknowledged that, and if you have been showcased in a place like 60 Minutes or nationally on the television, so that other people in other departments, especially at this time when police reform is so, contemporaneously high on the priorities. So if you could respond, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. If you know anyone in 60 Minutes, I could use an introduction. That would be appreciated. And I did have that same thought the very first time I went to a Rotary meeting in Longmont. I was like, hey, these are restorative values. Like, we're all on the same team here. So yeah, I really appreciate that about the guiding tenets of the Rotary. So one of the big things that's happened recently is a documentary was made about LCJP, and it was wrapped up at, let's see, it was the end of 2019. The filmmakers were planning on entering it into film festivals, so it wasn't available publicly. And then we had this global pandemic and film festivals aren't really happening. So the documentary is available on YouTube. So I can make sure that that gets shared with you all. And that has been really pivotal in how we can really get our message across outwardly. Up until now, it's just sort of been, again, like word of mouth. Often other officers, especially school resource officers in other communities and other cities, will just find us somehow and ask for information, ask about how we do what we do. But thanks to having this documentary, we actually went out to Eagle County, where like Vail and Minturn, and did a drive-in movie event. And we had police representation from several different towns and counties present at that event, as well as there was a DA and a county commissioner there. So it was, what I'm hopeful of is that that film helps us kind of get a little bit more, it becomes a vehicle for more of that awareness building and recognition. And then honestly, it's, I'm trying to figure that out. You know, I've published an article and a book about kind of how we train people to do this work, but I don't have anything published yet about our work with police. There's a student from Yale Law School who just wrote a really excellent article that he's trying to get published that's specifically about restorative policing. So yeah, I'm honestly open to suggestions and advice, because there has always been a little bit of a limitation of like, how can we, as a small nonprofit, how can we do a better job really getting the word out?
Yeah, I think it's really is important. Now, if you can put a link to that documentary to give it to Mike, and we can put it in our newsletter, we can all help.
Yes, I know that. Yep, I know the newsletter editor. So, okay, so before we go on to Daryl's question, this is you mentioned, I heard you say something about the 25th, Daryl, yep. I heard you say something about your 25th anniversary or whatever, 25th year, and I'm just wondering if you and Chief Butler, and are you guys celebrating? What are you guys doing?
We are celebrating, of course. I always like to have a party. It's very restorative. Anything to build resilience. Next Saturday, September 19th, we are having a fundraiser celebratory event, and because of the virus, we're doing it online. So I would love to send that invitation out to all of you. We have a number of local speakers lined up, including Mike Butler, a Longmont police officer, one of our interpreters, our Spanish language interpreters, speaking about language justice, and some other really fun, it's like a kind of high-paced, fun event because it's online. We want people to be able to be interested and hold their attention. And we also are gonna have some music that was pre-recorded by Nick Forster of E-Town as part of the event. So maybe some of you are familiar with Nick, but he made a special effort to select songs related to peace building and restorative justice. So it'll be a really fun and inspirational night.
Great, thank you. Daryl, do you have a question?
Yeah, this is actually Mike Wallace from 60 Minutes. And Kathleen, no, just kidding. So I wanted to back up just a little bit. And, you know, I think a lot of us are familiar with mediation, you know, not because we did bad stuff. I want you to know that. But I wanted to know about what the differences between mediation and restorative justice were, and kind of take a little bit more granular question to you.
Yeah, thanks. You know, sometimes when people are struggling to understand restorative justice, I say it's kind of like mediation, but there are some really fundamental differences. I would say the main one is that in restorative justice, that criteria that the parties who are coming who have caused harm have to be, from the beginning, willing to take responsibility, to own what they've done that caused harm, and to be willing to make repairs. So in mediation, there's a little bit more of like you don't have to be committed to that coming into it. You can be sort of just willing to tell your story and reach compromise. Whereas restorative justice is really moving towards this idea that harm has been caused. Someone is going to take responsibility for that harm and hear from the person or persons that they've affected, and really commit to repair with that person. So mediation focuses more on like positions, people's positions, and moving, like helping them to sort of relate to each other's positions and see what needs to move forward in kind of a workable agreement that could involve compromise. Whereas restorative justice looks for that like acknowledgement of specific harms and how to repair those.
Wow, excellent. Thank you.
Okay, Kathleen, we've just got a few more questions, few more minutes. Are you doing okay?
I just left the way he darted off the screen. I think he's going to get 60 minutes for me.
Okay, Bob Stunkel, you have a question.
You just mentioned Yale Law School, Kathleen. Are academic programs in restorative and reparative justice increasing in higher education for training leaders like you and Michael Doherty? And what are you learning about increased courses on restorative justice in law schools of our nation?
You all, could we share this with the world? You all are asking such awesome and important questions. I really appreciate it. I don't say that to all groups anyway. So yes, fortunately, there's initially back like in the 70s when restorative justice, which is really rooted in ancient indigenous practices of how to address harm and wrongdoing in communities. In the 70s, it kind of made this like re-entry into our contemporary justice system. And at that time, Eastern Mennonite University on the East Coast, which is a Mennonite school, they were one of the first ones to start incorporating restorative programming into the university setting. And now, over the time that I've been involved in this work, restorative justice is showing up a little bit in criminal justice studies. So students like at University of Northern Colorado in Greeley will be often introduced during their criminal justice studies. Schools like University of Denver now teach restorative justice through the School of Social Work. But then they also actually offer restorative justice to students for student conduct events, like CU Boulder does that as well. So there's actually, using it in student conduct. And then I think one of the biggest measures of change is the University of Vermont Law School has had this Center for Criminal Justice Reform that they just renamed the Center for Restorative Justice. Oh. And it's getting federal grant funding. I'm very familiar with it because the co-author of my book, who used to work at LCJP, is now the assistant director of that center. So I'm hoping to also, back to that, to Gary's question, I think, hoping to use that connection to really get more information out into the world about our work. But yeah, I think that is going to set a precedent, that center in Vermont, for what other universities can do to really incorporate in the law degree setting more understanding and more information about, like, especially how prosecutors as well as public defenders can be integrating restorative principles into their work and their practice.
Oh, thank you. That's very encouraging.
I agree.
Great. And then we've got Jim Radowski for the last question. Jim, you have a couple of really good ones that you've posted, but we only have time for one. So give us your best one.
I was wondering what can be done to expand the adoption of restorative justice. You know, it made me, as you described the scenario, think about what would it be like if there was a restorative justice person that accompanied police as they go about their duties, or if there was more training for police in this whole concept of restorative justice, so that fewer people are sort of funneled into the traditional criminal justice system, which we all have become aware is fraught with all sorts of problems of injustice.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I would love, you know, like we in many professions, if I could work myself out of a job, you know, if we just had a case actually a couple weeks ago where the victim was really struggling with whether or not she could successfully participate in restorative justice. And my coworker was really working with her, you know, not to put pressure, but to explain why it might be beneficial, and also setting boundaries about how she was expected to show up. And ultimately, I don't know all the details, but it was determined that we couldn't move forward with the case. So our staff member sent it back to an officer, and that officer actually reached out to the offender and victim and said, I would like to just bring you two together and facilitate a conversation. We called it Doorstep Restorative Justice because it happened outdoors, of course, on someone's doorstep. And that's not the first time that I have heard officers in Longmont say something to the degree of like, we don't really even need you guys. Like, we should just be doing this. And there's, of course, a lot of training that would need to go into that to make sure that restorative justice is practiced with fidelity, because it does really come up against many of the more sort of traditional punitive or adversarial values that are embedded in our systems, and that can affect everyone. But yes, I agree with you, and I would jump at any opportunity to work directly in any agency where there's, you know, where it usually starts is there's one or two champions, right? Like in our case, it was Chief Butler. But often there's somebody in the department who says, like, we need to do things differently. And if that person were willing to integrate some of the skills and concepts and just model it for their peers, I think that could actually go a really long way.
Great. One final comment, and that is, if you would like to join Rotary, I would be happy to sponsor you. When would you like to join?
When do I get that 60 Minutes deal?
Oh, we can work on that.
She strikes a hard bargain.
Yeah.
I've got Morley Safer on the line.
Okay. All right, great, Jim. Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Daryl. Thanks, Kathleen. I'm going to hand it over to Marcia, who has a few comments for you. Marcia, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yes, thanks, Mike. Kathleen, it's been so wonderful having you speak. Every time I hear you speak, I get so inspired, even more inspired about restorative justice, and I learned so many more things. So I'm so glad that you were here today. As a volunteer at LCJP, and I can probably speak for Michael and Jean, we've seen firsthand the positive impact restorative justice has on the responsible person, the harmed person, the community, and, you know, us as volunteers. So you being at the helm of LCJP is very inspiring. Rotary has been working for 26 years to eradicate polio around the world. And this year, 2020, we are 2 countries away from it being eradicated totally. So Kathleen, the Boulder Rotary Club would like to donate 100 doses of vaccine in your name. So thank you again for being here.
Thank you so much. That means a lot to me.
And Kathleen, I would just like to echo that you are truly an inspiring person and would be a wonderful Rotarian, and you already are. So thank you so much for joining us today, and you're a fabulous speaker as well. So thank you.